Hello, welcome to the landscapes of the soul. Tonight we're going to talk about the flow of the Spirit. I've been reading Richard Rohr, and I have been reading a man by the name of David Benner. So these writers are my sources, but I'm integrating that with my own thoughts. And Richard Rohr wrote this week, "My life is not about me." And that got me to thinking about the meaning of my life. If my life is not about me, if not, then what? So I also want to talk about what does it mean to be a relational person in community. We have so far traveled to the journey of the body-centered self, the mind-centered self, the soul-centered self, to tonight, which we're going to talk about, the spirit-centered self. So, in thinking about that question, if my life, my life is not about me, I hope you've had an opportunity to reflect upon that during the week, thinking about what does that mean. So I'm going to help us to understand how my life is not about me, but still has meaning and purpose and destiny. So my life is not about me, then it means that I have to become a relational person in community. And so the spirit-centered self is really about learning to become a relational person, a transcendent person, and a whole person. And so we're going to try to unpack that this evening. We have to begin with a closed-minded, or what I call a fixed mind, or a stuck mind, that prevents the flow of the Spirit to reorient us, our lives, toward a Christ-centered life. So if we choose to open our minds, our hands, and our hearts to one another, and especially to the flow of the Spirit, we begin to shape our perceptions by our spiritual experiences. So there's a flip. The flip is, I am a spiritual person having human experiences. Doesn't mean I'm not human. It means I'm beginning to see myself in relationship to God, in relationship to my soul, in relationship to other people, and otherness that are insignificant, or general population, otherness that I would not ever think that I have a relationship with. So it breaks open our stereotypes about what it means to be a relational person. Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist, said that it's impossible to be conscious or to have consciousness without relationships. Let me say that again. Jung says it's impossible to have consciousness or be conscious without relationships. Because within relationships, then we become more aware. Awareness that enables us to not focus on me, but what's going on around me and the people around me. So awareness of my surroundings. It also develops understanding. The old Anselm dictum of faith seeking understanding. So we have faith, but we're still seeking understanding about that faith. And then knowledge. Our knowledge begins to expand. We're not so fixated upon our opinions, not so fixated upon ideology, but our knowledge is more lucid. The horizons are expanding, and we're learning more and more each day through our experiences and the experiences of others and stories. Then our perspective begins to change. We begin to see from the mountaintop, and it's like a camera that moves back in the room, and it's not just focused in one specific, but it moves back and it begins to take in the whole picture, and we can reflect on all the landscapes that are around us. To understand ourselves as created in the image of God says nothing about the meaning of that other than we are created with capacity for relationships. God created the male and female. It's not about stereotypes about male and female, but rather the capacity for relationships, relatedness to God, to our own soul, to others, significant others, and general others, those that are different in otherness. When we are developing our capacity for relationships, we are also developing our capacity for our soul. Soul talk is the language of the heart. Try telling your significant other that you love them with all your head. What they want to hear is you love them with all your heart. It's the language of the heart. It's soul language. The soul language, spirituality in one sense is learning a new language. It's when I studied Greek or when I studied Hebrew, or if I taught you sign language, you'd have to learn that language to be able to communicate. Well, spirituality has its language, its heart language, its soul language. And we have to learn that language to communicate with God, to communicate with one another. So that as we learn the language, then that language begins to shape our perceptions that give us a new perspective, understanding, and awareness and knowledge. It was Jung that also said that unrelated humans, that is people that do not have the capacity for relationship, he says they lack wholeness. They're not whole. For he can achieve wholeness through the soul. In other words, through the soul we achieve wholeness in our relationships, and the soul cannot exist, he says, without relationship. So the spirit-centered life is basically nurturing and shaping and forming and transforming our soul so that we have the capacity for relationships, we have the capacity for transcendence, and we have the capacity for wholeness. Christian spirituality and becoming a relational person and community is growth in love and forgiveness. Love and forgiveness. The movement of the Spirit towards universal and inclusive love is the flow of the Spirit. That is the Spirit-centered life. It's in the flow of God toward universal love and inclusive love that also has a component of forgiveness. Forgiveness is an open door to love reinstated. Forgiveness is an open door to love reinstated. Now, it's an open door because it has the quality of redemptive presence and suffering. Say that again. Forgiveness is an open door because through the redemptive presence and suffering. In other words, by Jesus' stripes, by his wounds, we are healed. So there's a Latin phrase that is sacrum farcere, which means to make holy. Now, holiness, there's two things about holiness I want to say. First, holiness is not the way to God. Wait, let me say it again. Holiness is not the way to God, but rather Christ is the way to holiness. You've got to get that straight. If you're trying to be holy, it's not going to work. But when you're Spirit-centered and Christ-centered, that leads you to holiness. But holiness does not mean separated from something. It's not separating yourself, but rather it is calling you to something. It's a real positive. It's calling you to relationships, to transcendence, to wholeness. Now, how that works is this way. The word farseri means to have a mind to do this. You've made up your mind. That's what it takes. You make up your mind, and then it means you're going to do it. You do it. You do it. You make it happen. And what you're making happen is the sacrum, which is basically means the wound or the brokenness or the unforgiveness part that we're trying to forgive is being mended by threads of grace. It's not your work. It's the threads of grace that is mending that fragmented piece. And it simply means to take the part that is wounded and to sew it or to mend it into the whole. And the whole is God through Christ's redemptive work on the cross. That's the suffering. And then the resurrection is the whole God. We get the whole God when we receive Christ and ask the Spirit to flow into our soul, and we enter into the flow of the Spirit into wholeness. And then we become realigned. And when we become realigned, we are whole. And when we are whole, we are aiming then toward this thread of healing that mends us into the whole, so that we can love inclusively and universally. We become whole. Our wounds then become sacred wounds because they're redemptive. It's the redemptive suffering. To forgive someone costs you, and sometimes it's painful to forgive. But as you learn to do that, it's not for the other person, it's for yourself, because you are being mended and healed to become whole. The mending threads of grace, to make, to have in mind, to do, to be connected to the whole. Our wounds then reflect God's wounds in Jesus. We identify with the wounds of Christ, then we ourselves become wounded healers for other people. It's the redemptive work on the cross and the resurrection of cross that we experience. And then the Holy Spirit, the weaver, I call the weaver of sacred threads of grace, to move us to a profound love for which we become a relational person in our communities. The Spirit-centered self integrates. Now, this is the key component, because we've talked about the body, we've talked about the mind, we've talked about the soul. They're not different, they're not scattered. The Spirit is weaving through these threads of grace into an integrated whole, so that we are a body, we are a soul, we are a spirit, we are a mind, we are one with God, one with each other. There is unity in ourselves, so that we're not scattered or fragmented or broken. The relational, transcendent, and the whole person knows, understands, is aware and perceives. We say that again. The relational, transcendent, and whole person knows, understands, is aware, and perceives that my life is not about me, but rather about God and others. In conclusion, let me just talk about the characteristics of a whole, transcendent, and relational person. A whole, relational, and transcendent person is a person who can hold others, hold them in place, help them, not judge them, not accuse them, but rather hold them by that kind of love. But it's also a kind of love that can let go. You're not attached, you're not holding on, you're not grabbing. You can let go. in that letting go is the sustaining, redemptive presence that you offer to others that come into your life. So next week, we will begin the journey of the landscape that Jesus traveled through the Gospel of Mark and John. This concludes the body-centered, the soul-centered, the mind-centered, and the spirit-centered part of this landscapes of the soul. Now we're going to actually look at the various landscapes that Jesus walked on and the landscapes that we walk on to try to understand how those landscapes shape our understanding of our soul and who we are as relational, transcendent, and whole persons in community. Thank you for checking in. We'll talk to you soon. Love you guys. Bye-bye for now. From my heart to your heart, God bless.